Hello everyone, welcome back to the Biggening Corporation live stream. Just a quick recap for those joining us new. It is an incremental game using Business Central functionality and engine to learn about AL code development. And we'll also learn a lot about the system along the way. The players will use bots as virtual employees, vendors, and customers, generating transactions and revenue. And the goal of creating all that revenue is to be the company at the end of each season with the largest wealth. So we'll see if we can give some good game balance around that. So today's goal is going to be focused around continuing where we left off yesterday. We had our very first heartbeat. We have a setup table that is going to keep track of what game day we're on, and we now need to do something with that information. And as mentioned yesterday, one of the first things that we are going to maybe make use of that heartbeat listener is to record some sort of power usage by the bots. And I think for the purposes of player analysis and ease of calculation for how much each day's power bill should be, a ledger specifically for that purpose would be useful. And we may, depending on time, I try to keep these to an hour, we may, depending on time, talk a little bit about dimensions in the context of Business Central and how we're going to have those interact with bots. And I do not mean 2 versus 3D. So, the heartbeat, where we left off yesterday, we had created a job queue entry to be our master heartbeat in the master company, changing the game date along. Now I have left this running in the intervening time, so if we go ahead and look at this job and we navigate to the log entries, we'll see it's been running right along since yesterday, which should mean that where we left off yesterday, January 2nd in 2020 in our game system, if we go look at our game setup table, we should see it has cruised right along. So that gives us a nice, easy sense of what are we looking at here. We can see that we are just about 1/4 through 2020 in one real-world day. I think that's fantastic. I hadn't done the math on specifically every permutation of like how much time equals how much time, but I love the idea of a day in real life equals about 1/4 of in-game time. That's very easy to get your head around. It's obviously approximate, but still, that's fantastic. So we now have our heartbeat just humming along, and that's good, but now we have to do something with our pulse. And for that, I admit I had to do some experimentation. We have this game setup company set up as intercompany, so all the companies in our development environment here can see that data. And I said, okay, well, if all the code units are seeing the same piece of data, how does the event system work with that intercompany information? And to be honest, I had no idea. I haven't had too many business cases where I needed to combine those two things yet. So whenever you're dealing with complicated systems and you run into an area of technology you don't know, something that you're not sure of how it all will work, it's better to take that question and create a brand new little micro extension that will be able to yield just enough functionality and just enough information to be able to answer that question. So to that end, off camera, because I honestly didn't know what would happen, I created a new little micro extension in our company, just a simple intercompany event test extension. And in this one, I used a lot of the same things that we did. In fact, the setup table here is exactly the same, just a game date and with a date and data per company false. And I created a new very basic little list table called the event log that was also data per company false and auto incrementing an entry number, And we would record which company name, which date time this event happened at, and what we saw for the change. And I created a very simple basic code unit, the Intercompany Event Watcher, that would, anytime the table was changed, the intercompany test setup, once a modify event was called, it will call this function. And all this function will do is it will create a new entry in our intercompany event log with which company are we currently in to see the change, when is the exact date time that change happened, what was the new date time, and what was the old date time, and go ahead and throw that into the log. I truly had no idea. Would we only see this event in the company that we're calling it from? Would we only see or would we be able to see this modify event from all the different companies? I actually had no idea. So that was an interesting experiment, and we can reproduce it nice and easy. This interco test setup, just like our heartbeat service we coded towards the end yesterday, if we bump that up to a new number, we know that that little watcher code unit has just potentially created a new log entry. But for which companies? And I did not know. And the short answer is only in the company we are currently in. So, events can work with tables that are intercompany data. However, they will not fire for each of the companies. So that's very, very useful and core data to know about. This means that we can't do something very, very simple for our systems, which I would have loved to have done, which is if we had simply one master table that when we changed the date, all of our related companies could change based on that. That would have been fantastic. So, since we can't do that, that means that we can't really use event logic to listen for our heartbeats in all the subsidiary companies, which is a little bit of a shame. It would be nice if we could go ahead and do that. That means that we are going to have to be a little bit more creative, and in each of the companies, a job queue entry will have to be made that watches for when the game date changes. Not optimal, to be honest, but I think that'll also work out okay. I think that'll give a little flexibility, I think. So that means that not only do we have to have a master game date that is the master for the game in general, but we're going to need to store that so that the current company knows which date that company is on, and if that has any differences, can then go ahead and process on that. And a good question in chat, change company might work, but what we would have to do is we would have to cycle through all the different companies. And because this is something that is so core to how the functionality works, I think it's worthy of an experiment here. So now that we know this event is firing only for that game change event, what we can do here is we can go ahead and say, oh, the game has changed. We now need to potentially change company and process some information inside of this code unit. The problem with that, I think, is that what we're going to find ourselves doing is we're going to start event chaining. If I were to say, for example, then down here, do a change company to my player one company, whatever it is, and I do a modify true event that will happen within the context of that player one company, as I've discovered, this event will fire not within the player one company. So I cannot listen to the modify event from the player one company, which is a little bit of a shame. I don't know that there's a lot of business case functionality that I could make to Microsoft to say, there should be some way that we can have smarter intercompany handling for eventing. I haven't had a whole lot of business case scenarios where that would be critical. So what we are going to do instead is we are going to say, okay, we need to just keep some things in sync. Small thing, just because I hadn't apparently turned it on. I really appreciate that the Waldo extension pack includes one called AL/XML doc. That was added earlier, and when I updated my Visual Studio Code, it updated all my extensions, and so now it's helpfully telling me that all of my functions are required to add some documentation. It's a really cool piece of functionality, but I don't think that we are going to spend the time on screen to create documentation for all of our functions. However, I will say that it is a great idea for professional projects where you might have to hand off work to someone, such as, taking a vacation, whatever have you. It's a very simple bit of autocomplete code that will warn you about and say, hey, you should put some sort of description and explain the parameters. I think that's a good idea. It's a nice little tool. You can theoretically create some markdown documentation, and then you can check that into your GitHub repo. I dig the idea of it. We're not going to use it for this series, I'm afraid. So, reload required. Sure. Okay. It was simply adding too many problems to our work list, so no thank you. Okay, so knowing this from our experimentation now, we don't need this extension, but we've learned something valuable, that we cannot rely on eventing to cross company barriers. Not surprising, but a little disappointing. That does mean that we are going to need to have something on a per company basis, which I am inclined to think can be part of the company information table. One of the areas that is commonly done to older systems that is generally not recommended is you can technically modify the company's table that is built off of in older versions. It might even be possible to do in the extension age, but it is not recommended to extend system tables usually. Those are often regenerated, and for example, in our case, I mostly, when I'm dealing with per company information, will do this to, the company information table instead. There is, of course, the chance that you could, in a business environment, have someone create a company and not update the company information table. That is common if we do copy tables, copy companies for testing purposes. There may be settings in here that drive some important business decisions, and as soon as you copy the company, all those important business pieces get copied as well. That can be very dangerous for integrations, so be very careful with company management and copying of things. As an aside to the folks who are watching, a little later this week I will run a quick poll, probably on Twitter for simplicity, to see should we be going faster through the code, we want to see the results, a little less explaining, or for those of you who are new to AL development, is it more useful to slow down and get into the meat of things? Why are we making some of these decisions? So, follow on Twitter and you'll see a poll on that in a few days. So, with our new strategy in place, we know that we are going to need to store this, the current game date for this company, so that way we can see if there are differences. And I will note that in my earlier setup I did not do anything spiffy like data classification. This is system metadata. Good. Always good to have that as a habit. Technically, we should also be creating captions. Still, again, good habit. Now, this current game date, for the most part, no user should be editing this, ever. This is a storage piece of information, but it might be nice to show. So we can go ahead and say editable false on that, and that way we can show it on the company information page, but not risk anyone making the change. Editable false is ignored by code, so we'll be fine. And now we can go ahead and add this to our company information page here, current game date, and later we'll probably add this to some role centers, because why not? Great. Okay, so that now still isn't doing anything. So we have a few folders for bots and some of the intercompany management and role centers. We don't have anything specific for player company events. So let's create a folder. Oops. A folder for player company specific things. Arguably, the role centers for the system manager and the players could be folded into these folders as well. I find that the UI specific things like role centers sometimes is nice to break out. There's lots of different ways to organize this. It's very stylistic. If you are a developer working in a company, make sure to find out what your internal policy is about structuring things. But we are going to create a new little code unit again. And this is going to be our player heartbeat listener. Great. Okay. Now, all this is going to do is fire events, I think. We're going to keep this a little bit nice and simple. We don't know what things we might want to hook onto the heartbeat within the player company. So it seems to me, rather than potentially making this code unit become a massive thing that does, it goes through all the sales bots, it goes through all the purchase bots, it goes through all the different bots of the different types, and all those function hooks start here, let's be smart about this and we'll go ahead and fire an event. Then later, when we have code units that handle each of the different bot types, they can simply hook onto the event that we're going to publish here. But we still need our good friend to run the trigger, because we are going to set this up as a job queue, and very simple, we are going to create a there are snippets that we are using heavily throughout this that maybe I don't always mention what they do. For example, one time we used the T event sub, which is the template for event subscriber, but there isn't one for event publisher, and that is because there are two different types of events you can publish: business and I believe it's internal. It's integration. Well, it's technically integration, but interesting. Internal event. Perhaps some of the nomenclature has changed a little. I might look that up and talk about it a little bit more in our next episode. So, for now, I think we'll publish this as a business event, because this event isn't going to change very often. And we do have some options here. First of all, in the when we create events, do we want to pass along the code unit that is the event publisher? So if we had code running inside of this and variables inside of this, and we wanted events to be able to access that information, here we would want to choose to include the sender. In our case, we're just running a tiny little function. And you'll note that if we try to create code inside of an event, it will tell us, can't do it. The event can't contain code, and that is because all this does is say that something happens. So if we wanted a code unit to publish an event to say that something happened, and we want to describe what happened, like, this sales order we created a new sales order using this code unit, and which sales order did we create? Well, to do that, this would be a scenario where we would say true, and we would have to have a function on this code unit that returns which sales order was involved. We cannot, in this event subscriber, do anything special with that. However, I believe been a while since I've written an event subscriber. Yeah, that's what I thought. We can pass parameters. So, for example, if we did some function, create sales order, and that returned a new sales order for us, we could call procedure. We could call that with a function that returns a code and pass that as a parameter. Then later, when we do the subscriber, this becomes available. So, some nice options around that. We'll do a lot more with eventing, so if you're not entirely sure what I'm talking about just yet, that's okay. We will do more. So we'll just create a very simple procedure called heartbeat. And when this code unit is run, what we need to do is we need to see if the game date and the company's current game date have any difference. So we need our company information, which I am going to go ahead and also add the game setup. Yeah. So company information.get. Now, one thing I will say is here I'm doing a get and I'm assuming the company information exists. If you get an error because the company information table does not exist, I'm okay with this code unit blowing up and throwing the error because it will go into the job queue event log as could not find the company information. Oftentimes when you're coding anywhere else, if you do gets or finds or any of that, those motion things where we talked about filter motion, goodness, I think my autocomplete just helped me a little too much there. Filter motion action, right, save, whatever have you. Anytime you do the motion, there is the possibility of failure to that motion. A get might fail, a find might fail. If you do not wrap an if around this motion, you will present an error to the user. Sometimes that's okay. So you just need to think about this and make it a conscious decision of, do you want motion to fail in a way that the user sees that? In our case, we're fine with that. That's okay. So if company information dot current game date does not equal our game setup dot game date, then we will do a heartbeat. That will trigger the event. But here's the thing, with this as it currently written, every time this job is run, it will always be true because we are not updating the current game date. So we will go ahead and we will say, after we call our heartbeat event to everyone, then we will go to the company information and change the current game date to equal Now, some of you might notice an interesting little trouble with the way I've written this. Okay. Every once in a while, the extension validation that looks at your language, especially if you're changing if structures and things like that, will give you false positive errors. If that happens, just close and reopen the object. That was just happening to us. It was complaining, had redline under heartbeat, and it redlined this whole procedure because it hadn't revalidated the language around things. So just reopen the file. Usually that's the case. So, there's an interesting and dangerous assumption here in the way I've written this. If, for example, one of our player companies, something is going wrong with the way that the events have been called, and something about the engine is not working correctly. We're getting an error message when a sales bot runs, something like that. There is no fault tolerance to this logic here that will basically pause this player's game. If this job itself, this heartbeat listener, fails and something is going wrong with that job, and it's not detected for an in real life day or two, there is nothing in our logic here that looks for how big of a difference is there between the current game date and the game date of the master record. So we may at some future point in time need to go ahead and do a little bit of logic checking where we may want to consider, and we'll go ahead and flag this with a to-do to think about it, we may want to consider doing date math and calling the heartbeat event for the number of days that are different. So something to think about in case a player company falls behind due to a system error. Would it then go ahead and try to catch up for the potentially significant number of days that might pass in a day or two of real life time? So date math for fault tolerance, something for us to think about. Okay, but nice and easy on that. Let's go ahead and save all on that. So what we will eventually need to do in our routines for the master data side of things, when we do all of our company management, we have a function that creates a new test company for players. One of our known things that we will need to do now is not only do we potentially need to copy the setup data like we have here, but we're also going to need a job queue set up to run inside the player's company. And let's switch over to that, and we'll create one right now just as a test case, because why not? We've got a test player one already rocking and rolling. So we'll do that. And, of course, we need to publish these changes. That code unit does not exist in this environment yet. And in our player company here, we just have the standard built-in ones. But we should be able to code unit 3003. I'm not sure if I have to refresh. Cool, I did not. So we have a nice easy player heartbeat listener function, and we'll want that to recur. This one, because it is a tiny little piece of code, it just goes, is there any difference? Then we'll call a heartbeat. And if there is no difference, it does nothing else. The simplest way for us to keep players pretty close, although not perfectly, in sync with each other, is if we go ahead and we create these and we say go ahead and start right at midnight and go to, I'm not sure why my region settings aren't in 24 hours, but whatever. Simply go ahead and set this to run 1 minute between runs. For the most part, that will be fine. Another to-do that we will add to our pile of things, and this will apply to both the heartbeat producer and our listener here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up towards the top of the here. To do clean up job queue entries. We will want to have a nice little function for both of these that will try to keep the log of all the events for this to a reasonable minimum, especially a job like this where we're running it every minute. That's a lot of entries to slowly fill up this log over the course of a season for, say, maybe even 20 players. That would be a lot of data. So anytime you're creating job queues, think about maybe writing a little extra bit of functionality to auto remove the job queue log entries. There are actions in here that we can delete entries older than 7 days, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I believe we can just call that functionality. But we still need to do it. And as a system manager for even 20-player companies, we don't want to have to go through each one of these once a week and tidy it up. That would be silly. So let's go ahead and put the same to-do here in our master heartbeat. Brilliant. And now we can see that we've got some to-dos in here to clean up the job queue entries. For both of those, we'll be able to copy the same functionality, so that won't be a very hard piece of work for us to do. Okay, so we now have this job, and this can go ahead and run. Status ready. Go for it. We should be able to, within a moment, the job queue or / task scheduler runs approximately every minute in the background. So once that has run, hopefully that has completed, we should be able to go to our company information, and see, even though this record, we don't have anything really filled out in this as of yet, we still, however, have the current game date, which is our April 4th. Perfect. Excellent. One of our near future to-dos is in my settings. You can see right now my work date is defaulting to today's date. However, we are going to add a little code unit somewhere for players that when they log in, the work date will look to the company information for the current game date and update the work date to that date on login. So that will be how we nice and easy make this simple for everyone. Okay, so we've got our heartbeat running enough that we have the company information inside of a player environment firing off a little event. Great. Okay. Well, now what? We should do something with that. We've got an event. So, since our first little bot that we've got in our bot list, which I still have not added more templates for just yet, is our little sales bot we created yesterday, and that is going to use 10 power per day. So I would like to now go ahead and create some basic ledger entry system so that we can keep track of which bot has used which power and whether or not that power has been billed. We will use that billing information later to create our expenses to the GL. For those of you who are familiar with Business Central already, I think what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and the power bills will just be posted as straight general ledger entries rather than going through the process of having a specific power vendor and managing documents around that power vendor. I think we'll be better off just doing straight GL entries. If we do have unlockable research later that affects the price of power or things like that, those can still be brought into account to the ledger entries. So I don't think we'll gain any benefit for having the separate vendor and document system for these. So a ledger entry will give us a power ledger will give us pretty much all we really need to know. So let's do that now. Okay, so I'm inclined, since we are having bought instances and templates and everything in this folder, and we've got player company information. I'm trying to decide structurally what makes the most sense for us for transactional data. We are going to have lots of different code units for the different types of bots, and power usage is a common one across all bots. So let's go ahead and we'll do the ledger entry within the bot folder. For clarity's sake, it costs nothing and has no implications whatsoever to move these around between folders later. The AL code does not care at all. So we can, if we change our mind on our reorganization, we can just move things. No big deal. So we're going to keep this nice and simple. We'll call it the Power Ledger. I like this table wizard. We didn't use it previously. We mostly just hand-coded everything out. I have to say I quite like it, and you'll see why soon. We can, of course, continue to use our integer. We'll have to add the auto increment flag ourselves afterwards, but that's fine. Now, some of the information that we're going to want to have. We will want to know which bot instance are we doing this for. And as you recall, our bot instances is another nice little integer. So we can say bot instance. Great. I'm inclined to bring the bot type along. And wow, this is very clever of an extension. It even detects my custom enums, so that's delightful. Okay. That'll be nice later. We can do some calculating sums based on our bot types, so that'll be really handy. Some of you will know what I'm talking about right away. Let's go ahead and we'll do a posting date as traditional of a name for a ledger. When did it get posted to this ledger? This day. And I'm still, like I said, just classifying everything as system metadata. We of course could do account data, customer content, blah 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 blah. None of this is going to be real world data for GDPR purposes, so we don't need to support the ability to clear this out. So okay, and then very simple power amount, which, to be consistent with language, let's go ahead and say power usage. We will also have a simple Boolean, very common language here of whether or not it has been posted to the GL. Great. Okay. I very much like this little table wizard. Pretty fantastic, and you'll see why in a second. I've named all these, and it has gone ahead and created captions for all of these. We don't have to worry about duplicating the caption work and all that sort of thing. Delightful. And we will auto increment our entry numbers. Great. System metadata. And you'll note we don't have to say anything about data per company because it is always assumed yes, which is what we want. Perfect. Okay. You'll notice it's a little hard to see the coloring with this particular color scheme. I'm using in our preferences, we can choose different color themes. I'm using a light one because I think it records better for purposes of streaming and for clarity and everything like that. Most of the people I know actually do work with a dark color theme, and I will say that the red of a problem detected with a file stands out significantly more against the darker background. So you may or may not have noticed some of the errors, but you also get used to watching on the right hand side. You will see red indicators if there is an issue like there was where I had auto increment not assigned anything, I get a nice little red dot that is a little hard to see when we're on the line, and we can also see that we get a red line on that. So we can also just jump to it directly with the problem list. So there's lots of ways. Always good. Okay, so now we have a very, very basic power ledger, but we have no page for this. So let's get us a page. New AL file wizard. We are going to do a list page. I feel like this has also updated because I do not recall getting some questions about API, so that's exciting. These are only required if you are doing page type API, as one might assume, so that's interesting. Okay, cool. I dig it. Anytime we're dealing with some of these different AL extensions, the devs are nice enough to give changelog information, which you can see directly from inside of Visual Studio Code. Fantastic, useful, and it gives you an idea of what things have changed lately. So, cool. Okay. Interesting. I like some of the changes, but it is taking some getting used to. Okay. Alright, fine. Nothing we'll dive into right now, but we're going to do a new page. Now I feel like I'm going a little crazy. That definitely looked different a moment ago. Okay. I'm going to assume some Visual Studio glitching on my part, because, yeah, I was wondering why we were getting API fields for part type of card. Okay, that's fine. Glitches, they happen. Let's see. We'll go ahead and call this our BCS power usage ledger, and this is coming from the power ledger table. Great, and this is going to be a list, which is of the category history. Okay, fantastic. This is primarily used to drive when we do the explore functionality. If you didn't know why am I choosing the things I am choosing, you can see here that it goes to some of the different places within this framework. This is still this is better than it was. There's still, I think, a little more to go, but you can see here we can have setup things under cache management. So if we chose setup, it would be under here. Sure. I think there's still some mixed value to that, but I go ahead and tag things with the usage category anyways, because that's what drives whether or not it's available for searching. Okay, so entry number to me should always be first. Great. I don't need system ID right now. We'll look at whether or not we're going to do some API development later, which is what that primarily will be used for. But we have here our power usage ledger, which, since this is a ledger, the editable on this is always false. Okay, nice and simple. By itself, nothing very exciting or fantastic, but yeah. Now, on the bot instance list, we could theoretically go ahead in the navigation area, create a new action, power entries, image equals ledger entries, beautiful, caption, power usage. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to run sorry, just making sure I'm thinking through the process correctly. page. Run page link. Yes. Okay. All right. So what we're doing here is on our bot list, which if we go ahead and we close up our Explorer, don't need that. We currently don't have a navigate function, but there should be the ability to navigate and see all of the power entries for just this specific bot. So I am adding to the navigation area a new action called power usage that will run where bot instance equals field bot instance ID. And I believe that's all I need to do to have that work correctly. We'll take a look at it. So a new action, I've given it the ledger's entry image because that's nice, a good caption, and theoretically what we should be doing is running that usage ledger, and a filter will be applied that the bot instance will be filtered on the ID of the record we are currently on. If I am thinking this through correctly. I'm not sure what untitled one is. Get out of here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and publish that. Now we won't have any entries initially, of course, but we do now have our navigate button, and we can see our power usage is right here, which opens up the power usage ledger. And if we look at the filter, I don't... yes, okay. The filter is automatically applied to the bot instance column. You can see right here we've got a filter on it. And the player can choose whether or not they're going to filter by that, but that looks like we're doing okay. So, great. Let's go ahead and create a code unit that specifically listens for heartbeats and then creates the power ledger entries for us to deduct. And I think that's going to take us through most of the rest of the episode. Yeah, that's okay. So let's do... Okay, bot power usage management, sure. And in this case, we are not going to run this code unit. We are going to subscribe to an event from code unit, BCS player heartbeat listener, and we are going to listen for the heartbeat event, which stylistically, possibly the procedure should be called on heartbeat. Just for consistency and standards, so we might want to update that. We'll give that some thought for a moment. And we'll go ahead and we'll say true for both those for the moment. I think, yeah, I deleted a parameter. Okay. Charge bot power usage. Our main function here is going to be listening for the heartbeat, and now what we are going to do is we are going to iterate through all the bot instances. For each, we will calculate the total power usage, which initially right now we are just going to use straight directly from the bot instance. We have a decimal for that, or I believe a decimal for that, but eventually that will be a calculated value, so we can take into account upgrades and things like that. And then for each of those we will then create a power usage ledger entry. Great. Oftentimes, if you aren't in the habit of doing this, when you're creating entirely new functionality, it's often a good idea to use comments to go ahead and create a narrative of what you're doing. And that allows you to more easily remember any of the steps that you might have to do, particularly if it's more complex than just these little short set of steps. It is also very, very helpful for people who are in high interrupt environments to be able to quickly remember what was I doing. And if you do them nice and tidy and have them make some sense, they're potentially useful to leave in place for clarity for someone else. What were we trying to accomplish with this code? Oh, okay, brilliant. All right. So, yeah, all right. Now we'll need some variables, of course. I love the IntelliSense, let me tell you. For someone coming from a development environment without it, it's a wonderful thing. Okay, now, typically when we're dealing with ledgers, there are usually also posting code units to go with ledgers. In our case, there's no related information that we need to validate or batches that are going to be posted. So in this case, we're keeping it very simple. Arguably, what we would do if we were to create a proper posting ledger combination is that this create power usage ledger entry would initialize a power usage journal and then call the posting code unit with that journal entry. You will find that that is the design pattern used throughout the Business Central system, that if you have a ledger, first you will have a journal. So let's see if we can hurry this on up, because I want to finish this for today's episode. We are going to do a reset on this. Always a good idea, just make sure our filters are clear. It's unlikely that there will be any filters applied, but hey, let's do it. So in the case of our loop, we are not modifying the bot instances, so then we can simply repeat. There's probably snippets I'm not using around this right this moment because I want to keep my contacts and comments intact. So for each bot instance we find, and we don't have to do this calculate power usage right now, we're just going to use what's straight on it. So we are going to say power ledger.init to clear out all of the values, which I think, does init take a, I can't recall if that initializes the primary key or not. No, that's fine. We'll find out real shortly. Bot instance dot instance ID bot type is equal to the bot instance bot type. Again, here I am doing straight assignments. I am not calling validate. If I recall correctly, the standard on this is you call validate when you know that validate is needed, which I think is a little strange to me. I would prefer to just always call validate, but that does produce performance overheads. That, events have to be generated for all of those validate calls. So when you are hooking into existing parts of the system, definitely give careful consideration of validation calls. In my case, this is a brand new table that I know does not have any validation logic on it whatsoever, so we can skip that for now. Okay, perfect. And we're going to explicitly say that it was not posted to GL, even though default value on that most likely is false. And then finally, we'll insert true, this power ledger entry. Great. Okay, so we now have a little chunk of code that listens for the heartbeat and will generate some power entries. Fantastic. Let's publish that, and we can, we don't have to wait for the job queue to run in the master company. We can go ahead and real quick just take this game ourselves. Boop. There we go. And now if we go look at our job queue entries in this player company, we just have to wait for this to run, which its next start time will be very shortly, hopefully. Fantastic. And within 60 seconds or so, that should go through. Real quick, while we're waiting for that, I want to chat to something that we are going to pay attention to in future episodes. We're not going to code up the logic for this right now, but in Business Central, whenever we're dealing with documents and ledger entries and those sort of things, we often want to be able to look at the chart of accounts based on different sub-criteria. Wonderfully and simply enough, it's referred to as filter totals by, and we can do dimensions. In our demo environment, department and project are the two dimensions, and we could go ahead and say we want to look only at our expenses by the sales department. This will update all of those net change and balances and things like that, so we can see nice and easy what all of the expenses were specific to that department. We are going to create a code unit sometime later this week, likely, where we will create a dimension for bots and be able to filter the dimensions by the different bot designators. And that way we'll be able to always look at the total of all of the transactions throughout the system on a per bot basis. So I think that'll be a nice little add, and it'll give us a little more insight into the dimension functionality. Alright, and now if we go back to our bot list, let's see, we should be all set. This should have run at least once, and it has. So we have our bot usage ledger has gone ahead and recorded that bot instance number 2, which will eventually make a drill down to the card so we can always look at info on. We are going to still need to update our workdate functionality. The job queue is not changing its workdate to match the game date just yet, so we'll fix that up. But we recorded a usage of 10 power on this day due to a heartbeat call. So we have created our first heartbeat-driven piece of data. That's progress. All right. I like it. Okay. Well, I think that is an excellent point to wrap the episode on. We will see tomorrow. We'll have a whole list of ledger entries in here for this bot, presuming that auto numbering is working correctly. I saw that it was 0, but that's okay. So hopefully we should see a quarter's worth of power usage in there. I will, real quick off camera, update this little code unit right here to update the workdate from the game date so that the posting date is correct. It is automatically using today's date for this work date at this time, which is incorrect. So we will review that tomorrow, and that will be in our roadmap. I will try to go ahead and revisit our bot templates and our bot types to try to get a few more of those up and running, as well as think about how we're going to handle some of the material requirements for bot types. And if people have any suggestions they would like to share on Twitter, I'm still thinking about the best way to do some of the randomized game balances for customers. I'm thinking about, since every bot equals a customer, then how do we want to make different customers have different value? I'm thinking that we'll do some game balance and game theory tomorrow about how that might work out. So feel free to share your thoughts. I'm thinking we'll do different customers with different quantities, but maybe larger quantity customers want different discounts. So we could choose to have a lower volume of order for a higher value or a larger volume. So we'll see what makes sense. I think that gives us our first ability for players to differentiate their decisions. So that'll be good. All right, well, excellent. Thank you for watching, and we'll see everyone tomorrow.